Recently, Doug Barry was with us. We were talking about Ephesians 5, and we were having a great conversation. We just ran out of time. So today I want to pick back up. And Doug, it's great to have you back with us. We're looking at the second part of this passage around verses 26 and 27, where husbands are exhorted to love their wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her. And why did he do that? Our Lord did that he might present to himself the church in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not the Lord, and I'm not presenting anyone to myself, but one day my wife is going to stand before the Lord, and one day I am as well. And I have a feeling there could be some questions. Adam, what did you do so that she could stand here in splendor without spot or wrinkle or any such thing? It's easy to philosophize about it, but we have plenty of opportunities in the everyday, quote-unquote, mundane life to make sure we're guarding her purity.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to address at the beginning of this, Adam, is looking at this from more of an interior standpoint, not just a spiritual interior standpoint, but the psychology of just humanity, okay? Your wife, gentlemen, and I know the ladies listening right now, some are going to be cheering this on, I have no doubt, because a lot of times, and I've been married 33 years, and a lot of times we get to that point in a marriage, and you've been married 14, you know it already too, where you can become almost mechanical in the way you go through your day-to-day life. We've got this, I raised 5 kids, and now we've got grandkids, and it's very easy to get focused sometimes on the list of things that needs to be done. And that's important because it's life, and we have to go through life and take care of different things. However, the emotional and the psychological part of what's going on inside a human being needs to be acknowledged. I remember one of the best bits of advice I heard from a priest when I went to confession one day, years ago, and he said to me, don't beat yourself up over your humanity. The fact that there's this component in us that God has created that is very human. And what does that mean? It means that we're not robots, and we don't just clock in and clock out, and you turn on the car and you drive. And if there's no gas in the tank, the car just doesn't go. Okay. Or no juice in the battery, your power tool isn't going to run, or whatever it may be. When it comes to a marriage, when it comes to a person, it's not necessarily the same about gas in a tank. It's more complicated. There are nuances. There are emotional and psychological, this and that. And I think one thing that has to be looked at when it comes to helping your wife be prepared to stand before God and present her without spot or blemish or any such wrinkle and so forth is understanding that this emotional, psychological part of who she is needs to be loved and addressed. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, just like with our children, my children when they were younger, and you got smaller kids, I know. So when they go through an emotional upheaval of some sort, you don't just cater to the emotional upheaval. That's not what I mean specifically when I'm talking about addressing the emotional and the psychological part of a person. But it's acknowledging that it's there and realizing that from a day-to-day, even from a moment-to-moment sometimes, part of our life, that can change very easily and very quickly. And that doesn't mean because someone's bipolar, that's a separate issue. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can be in a really good mood, and then something starts to happen within this very short amount of time. All of a sudden, you're concerned about something. You're worried. You see something in the news. Something happens here. There's a family event. You get a call from your parents. Someone's sick. Someone said something about your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your sister. And now the emotions have shifted. The psychology has shifted. And sometimes men can, with their wives, I think more so than women do with men, just walk in and say, well, what's the problem? Well, this happened now. So let's get over it. Just move on. And you can't do that with people. You take that particular moment that your wife is going through something and you address it lovingly, patiently, and help her through it, strengthen her through it. Ladies, you got to do the same thing for us men. There's no question, because we're human too. Sometimes guys get kind of stuck with that. He doesn't feel anything. He doesn't talk about his feelings. That doesn't mean we don't have them. All right. But in general, not a blanket statement, women can easily shift sometimes when it comes to this. Now, that's the feminine genius part of them as well that God created. They have the ability to nurture so wonderfully because they can shift that emotional piece of themselves. very, very, very quickly. I think more so than men. My kids would say this, my oldest son in particular, we do a lot of work together with our BR Coalition group. And Jordan, he's 29 now, and he has 3 kids of his own. And he would say to me, yeah, when we were hurt and we needed tenderness, we'd go to mom. But when we were scared and we needed protection, we'd go to dad. Because dad normally has that more staunch, hey, type of attitude and voice, and we're just this and that. Well, gentlemen, we cannot necessarily be that way when it comes to our wives when they're going through changes throughout a day of emotions and feelings and the psychology of this. Now, the reason I wanted to spend some time on that first, Adam, is because that's a key part of our humanity. And we've got to understand that God put us together. And because that key part of our humanity is there, if it's ignored or not dealt with in a way that's compassionate and strong and trying to order things the way God would want, then we're missing a major part, a beautiful part of a person in general, but especially our wives. And my wife, your wife, a wife in general has a beautiful gift to be able to nurture and has aspects and pieces of who she is that need to be looked at carefully. So I can lead her in the rosary. I can say we're getting to mass every Sunday and confession every 2 weeks, and we're doing the 5 first Saturdays and the 9 first Fridays. And I can say we're doing all this and establishing that. That is also very, very key and very important. But if I don't on a day-to-day basis pay attention to the humanity that God has created her with, and I don't look at those emotions, those feelings, and those thoughts, and those changes that happen throughout the day based on whatever events occur and unfold, and I don't address that, and then lovingly, patiently, as Christ does for the church. Does Christ not patiently address the changes going on in our world and our faith and our church? Of course he does. Does he still hold true relentlessly to what the deposit of faith is all about? Of course he does. But he's still patient in the process of looking at the details and the nuances of all the little things that happen. And we men, I think, need to do that every day with our wives.
One of the lessons I learned pretty early on is that if I want to encourage my wife, I have to keep an eye on pretty much everything I'm doing throughout the day and around the home. And not just, we talked last time about not just being the drill sergeant or, master and commander that we're doing this and we're doing that and this is how it's going to be. And by the way, if you ever want to get in a lot of trouble, just look at your wife and say, why can't you be logical? My wife is a very logical person, but in the heat of the moment, Doug, I happen to say that out loud. It was a bad move, one that I regret very much.
Timing.
So. Yeah.
Timing.
But, it's one of those things. I remember early on, we were watching a movie, and I forget, it was either, Maureen O'Hara or, who was it in... This is going to be great for our video editor because I'm going to start this part over here. A while back, we were watching a movie. It was either Maureen O'Hara or it was from Breakfast at Tiffany's. I cannot think of Audrey Hepburn, right? And I said, wow, she's beautiful. And I thought that was a really innocuous thing just to say, here's this movie actress from days gone by that I'm like, oh, wow, she's beautiful. And then I caught on that every time I was making a comment like that, was I saying that my wife was beautiful too? Like, she's hearing me say, oh, this person's beautiful, and that person's beautiful, and she's beautiful, she's beautiful. Does she hear me say, you're beautiful? Does she hear me say this? And I wonder in our society, it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing, especially as we talk about modesty and we talk about chastity. And as a father of girls, it's something I worry about very much. And luckily, they have a mother who does a great job of teaching them by example. If as men, if we're looking at pornography, if we are objectifying every woman around us, is that making our wives say, well, maybe he wants me to be like that. Maybe if I did this, maybe not even consciously. And now all of a sudden, Doug, we're setting them up to fail. Or if we come home and the first thing we do is grab, why isn't dinner on the table? Why isn't this? Why'd the kids do that? Why, and guilty is charged some days on this. I think most of us men would raise our hands and say that. Are we just causing our wives to say, well, why does, what did I do wrong? Why can't I make him happy? It's all my fault. And they start beating themselves up. And, my confessor once said to me, Adam, you're the captain. This is the ship. You're the captain. You set the mood. If you're calm, they're calm. If you build them up, they're built up. If you tear them down, the ship falls apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My wife said to me one time years ago, one of my favorite, actually, let me back up. One of my favorite paintings ever is the painting of Jesus in the boat It's a Rembrandt, I believe, and it's the painting Jesus in the front of the boat. You know, the famous story of him sleeping in the boat when the storm is raging, and then they wake him up. You know, we're going to die, Master. Don't you care? And you know, he basically tests their faith again. And but he stands up in the front of the boat and he says, "Be still," and everything calms down. And my wife said to me one time, she said, "You know, that's you. When you come home, you know, we're in the thick of raising 5 kids at the time and homeschooling, and she said, when you come home, you have that ability." She says, and it's not as if, you know, and she wasn't in any way criticizing me. She was saying it's not as if it's this natural great gift that you just have, though she says you're good at it. She said, but it's the fact that you are the husband and the father. You are this man. And so when you come in the house, you can set that tone by simply saying, you know, hey, be still. And if you do it in a certain, and this was her way. This is the complementary way God has designed husbands and you know, wives to be able to work together. She says something to me that encourages and points something out clearly what my role is and how it helps. Now, we don't always do that in marriages all the time. We know that. We sometimes get on each other's, you know, back. Any marriage knows that. Again, if you've been married longer than a week, you realize this can happen. However, understand the role, and the role of it is when the man can come into that home or into that situation. And you're right, just set the tone. He has that ability. I would say, you know, if a mother yells out the door in the evening, you know, Jimmy, it's supper time, you know, kids down the street, you know, this may have been years ago when kids would actually play outside down the street. But, you know, Jimmy would, it's just my mom, don't worry about it. But if dad yells out the front door, Jimmy, every kid goes home. Okay. Because, you know, the strength of a man's voice, the strength of a man's position, when it is a position and he's using that strength, I should say, in a godly way, in a prayerful way, that only magnifies it, and amazing things can happen. So yeah, you're right about that captain of the ship piece. That's a key thing. But that captain of the ship is willing to go down with the ship. He's not going to abandon the ship. He's not going to abandon his crew. And so we men can't abandon. And when we make mistakes, I want to emphasize this for the men: get back up, keep moving forward. I don't care if you're crawling into the confessional, get in the confessional if you have to. If you got to deal with the laziness, the terrible attitude, the anger issues, a lot of guys have bad anger issues, or they got pornography issues, or they got issues when it comes to gambling or drinking or something else. Get the help that's needed, get off the pity party knees that you're on, and move forward, because you need to be that faithful, holy captain of this ship.
Before we wrap up here, Doug, I want to go back to the book of Genesis, because as you were just saying that part, one of the things I couldn't help but think is the quote in Genesis: "It's not good for the man to be alone." And thank goodness I have a wife. We often tell people that we're like rocks in a tumbler, smoothing one another, polishing out the stones and the jagged edges. And I think I've got a lot more than she does. But we go back to that story in Eden. And we all like to say, well, it was Eve's fault, you know, because she was off, and the devil appears to her as a serpent and says, oh, did God really say, oh, you know, God said this? Oh, but don't you want to, here, take a bite of this apple? And that Eve ruined the party for everyone. But every now and then someone will ask this question, well, where was Adam? You know, why was he letting Eve be off being tempted by the devil? Why wasn't he there with her? You know, and again, going back to something you said when we started this conversation last time, that, you know, as a husband, I am not the savior of my wife. I will never be able to get her to heaven, but I can sure do a lot to tempt her away from it. It's our Lord that's the savior. But that doesn't, you know, negate my duty here on this earth. And I think sometimes we forget that. It's like, where was Adam? Why wasn't he there to be like, Eve, that dude's lying, let's go?
Yeah, I joke around about, you know, what was Adam doing? Well, he was probably out there in the garden watching the bears and the lions chase a pig skin around. Anyway, somehow he was either distracted, or he was cowardly, or something got in the way there. You think about what he could have done when Eve said, here, I've got something for you, Adam. And he could have said, oh, Eve, we weren't supposed to do that. You know what? I'm going to intercede for you and plead before God, okay, on your behalf. You know, but Adam went along with it. So yeah, they both did it. They both stepped into that. But but you're right about that. We men need to be on our guard. We need to be on the wall, basically, on the guarding the perimeter. I mean, it baffles me why men don't understand that it's built within us to be a protector and a defender. And again, back to that statement my son would say, and pretty much all my kids were the same way. They get hurt, they need tenderness, they go to mom. She can nurture. They need protection, they feel a sense of threat, they go to dad. Dads are protectors and defenders. We need to be that way naturally. Need to have a plan to protect. I'll always say this. We do this with our BR Coalition work. Be ready to protect and defend spiritually and naturally. Have a plan, learn how to defend and protect. This is something that's key with who we are. If someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night, tries to hurt your family, men, what are you going to do? You're going to get out of bed and engage the bad guy, or you're going to go hide behind your wife? You're going to go run in the closet? No, you're going to engage. If you love, you engage to protect and defend. Okay, most of us, please God, are never going to have a home invasion. But spiritually, it's going on all the time, every day, in every family, in every life, somehow, shape, or form. World, flesh, and devil, we're getting hit with stuff. Men, we've got to be on that front line. We've got to be on that perimeter. We've got to be on that wall. We've got to be ready to engage at a moment's notice. So when that moment happens and our wife is going through something, be there. Pray for her. Be that spiritual intercessor. Go to adoration for her. Gentlemen, if you're listening right now and you're driving down the street and you're even close to a Catholic church and you've got 5 minutes, pull in, go in, get on your knees before the Blessed Sacrament and just say 2, 3, 4 minutes of prayers for your wife, light a votive candle, and then go back to what you need to do. It doesn't have to be an hour of this or some big, grand sort of thing. To engage in the spiritual battle and protect the wife that has been given to you does not necessarily mean you have to be, Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris, or George Patton. You can be who you are because you're the best one suited to protect the wife that God gave you, but you've got to engage. I don't go anywhere without a rosary in my pocket, a scapular around my neck, and I have other more natural defensive measures on me too. But let's just focus on the rosary and the scapular right now. And when I'm out and about, I stop regularly into the Catholic Church that I drive by. It's not always on the way to where I'm going if I'm going to run errands or do something, but I make it on my way and I will go that direction to spend 5 or 10 minutes in prayer. Go to adoration, gentlemen. Pop into that church regularly. Get that rosary prayed daily. And I also encourage some sort of fasting. There's this thing out there, Exodus 90. We've all heard about it. I like the Exodus 365. All right. 365 days a year. Maybe Sundays you take off because it's a mini Easter. Okay. But how about 6 days a week, gentlemen? We have that strength and that grit and that manhood to do something extra. Sacrifice, extra prayer, make yourself uncomfortable spiritually or physically in some way and offer it up for what? A list of intentions that we could come up with. And of course, if you're a husband, first on that list should be your wife. And of course, your kids would follow right there with that. But gentlemen, make 6 days a week, do some intermittent fasting. Not only will it help you get physically healthier, it will be a spiritual gift. So adoration, prayer, fasting, engage in this spiritual battle.
All right, you heard it here first on Roadmap to Heaven. Adam Wright, Doug Barry, Exodus 3:13, but for legal reasons, not Exodus 3:13, but prayer and fasting every day. Doug, this has been great. Before we wrap up here, I want to go back to a story you once told us about your wife, because I know for a lot of the men listening to this, maybe for the first time, they're saying, all right, I'm on board with a lot of this, but now you're starting to get me out of my comfort zone. You want me to go around like I'm on the wall, like I'm on the perimeter. And I remember you telling me early on in your marriage, a priest was very direct with you. Are you praying over your wife and your children? Are you blessing them? Are you going around with the holy water? And so that night, you had no problem going room to room, sprinkle here, sprinkle there, sprinkle there. But when it came to your wife, she was already in bed asleep, and you kind of peek your head in the room and you're like, okay. And the next morning she said, did I have a dream that you were sprinkling me with holy water? And you said, yeah. And she goes, well, why don't you do that every night? How is it now? Now that your 5 kids are grown, you've got grandkids, has the weirdness of that first moment worn off?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I hear that from guys all over because I've told that story hundreds of times. And guys will say, yeah, when I first did it, I was petrified or terrified. And 99% of the time, I guarantee you, the women are thrilled. Okay. If your wife is on board at all, there's some women who are a little weirded out by it maybe at first. But right now, it's normal. Holy water, blessed salt, marking the doorway, on Epiphany. I mean, whatever it is to bring blessing and have the man initiate that. But to walk around the house with holy water, it's just they grew up with it. My wife and kids are familiar with it. I have holy water bottles, just strategically placed, if you will, in different places. So they're there, and it's not a over the top sort of, we've got to light incense and have monks singing Gregorian chant. No, gentlemen, just pick up the holy water and trace the sign of the cross on your wife's forehead. Sprinkle some in the bedroom, in the kitchen, the living room. Bless your kids with this. Make it part of your day. Integrate it into your life. It's a very powerful way because it's one of the greatest sacramentals the church has given the world.
On that note, though, I do want to give a shout out to the Benedictines of Mary in Gower, Missouri. If you do want some sacred music playing around the home, they've got some beautiful CDs of sacred music. You don't have to have it to go bless your wives and your children, as Doug just said. But I mean, if you just want your home to be holier, put some good sacred music on. Have good sacred art. That's a whole conversation for another day. All right, Doug Barry, thank you so much for being with us to talk about Ephesians 5. These last 2 episodes that we've had you on. I look forward to our next conversation.
I do too, Adam. God bless you, my friend.